Hi, and welcome back to my Philosophy Corner. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the ways information technology influences the post-truth phenomena. And this is arguably one of the biggest influences, given the fact that most of us use information technology on a daily, if not hourly basis. We all have smartphones, we use social media, we Google things, and we use other types of online media like YouTube or news sites. So, how does us using this technology contribute to post-truth? How does the fact that I log onto Facebook or I Google something lead to an environment where a shared, objective, or factual environment is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain? Well, in this video, I'm going to be discussing 3 ways information technology contributes to post-truth. The first is the personalized experience that we have online due to our data use. The second is with choice. We all choose to do certain things online. And also, there is a sort of subtle, insidious choice placed before us. And third is something a little bit more abstract in that both of these last 2 examples, we have the creation of what is called epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. These are words maybe you've heard before, and I'm going to be going over each of these 3 ways in more detail as the video continues. But before I get into that, I will need to ask the question, what do I mean when I say technology? It's a word I think most people have a very firm grasp of, but if I were to make a definition of it, what would it look like? And I would answer that there's 2 ways to look at technology. There's a practical way and an abstract way. And I'm going to be focusing in on the practical way of thinking of technology. That being that technology is simply a tool that we use to complete some job. So we use the axe to cut down the tree, I use the phone to go online and look at a YouTube video, or the example I want to focus on, we use a knife to cut vegetables in our kitchen. So, if I'm thinking about the definition, some tool that completes a job, I have my knife, the tool, and its intended job to cut vegetables. Now, I'm using the technology correctly in this way. I don't think anyone can disagree that a knife in the kitchen is used to cut things. But what happens if I were to use that knife to, say, open a can? Am I using the technology incorrectly? I'm using a tool and I'm completing a job. So, by this definition, I'm still using the knife correctly in its own specific way. So, I've adapted the tool to meet some new job. But what happens now if I were to cut my hand while opening that can? Now, what do we think? Well, everyone's going to say it's my fault. I should have known better, that the knife isn't used to open a can, and I shouldn't be surprised when I cut my hand. Okay, I think most people can agree with that. It's definitely not the knife's fault. We know the intended purpose of the knife. So, all of this talk of technology, of jobs, of the tools, I want you to keep this in your mind as we move forward into this video. We're going to be looking at the ways that information technology influences post-truth. So we can even ask the question now, well, what's the job that information technology seeks to do? Are we using this technology incorrectly because it's harming us? Let's move forward. So, let's look at the 3 ways that information technology and our use of it goes on to create this problematic information environment that we see today. The first of those is going to be the personalized experience that we have online due to our data. For most of you that know, whenever we do anything online, every video that we watch, every page that we visit, every friend that we have goes on to give away data to the tech companies like Facebook and Google. Now, this data is essentially all the information about us, all the activities that we do. And this information and data is collected and then put through smart algorithms or artificial intelligence to create what is known as a data profile. Now, this data profile is essentially everything about you. It is, well, you. It's all your likes, all your dislikes, and your beliefs. Now, these data profiles are used in various different ways. For instance, on Facebook right now, if you were to go on through all the different Facebook activities you have, from the pages that you have liked, the friends that you have, and maybe even the messages that you've sent, Facebook can accurately predict what your political stance is on things without any direct evidence of this. And Google too does a similar thing. If you go to your Google account, you can find all the different sorts of things that they might predict about you, like your age, your marital status, and your interests. Now, why do they do this? Why is Facebook guessing my political stance? And why is Google trying to figure out who I am? Well, the short answer is money. This is a huge economic incentive for these companies to do this. There should be no surprise to anybody that Facebook and Google are some of the most successful companies in the world today because of the way in which they use, interpret, and even in some cases exploit our data profiles. The way in which this happens is through personalized advertisements, typically. There's both economic ones, so when businesses try to sell you something, as well as political ones, when they're trying to sell you a certain idea or belief. And it's those political ones that get a little bit elusive, but the economic advertisements as well play some interesting psychological games with us in the way that they're able to dig deep and really understand who we are. So for instance, on the political advertisements on Facebook, in the last video I mentioned this company known as Cambridge Analytica. And this was a company back in 2016 that had a big influence on the electoral decisions of the US presidential race and Brexit. And they were able to do this because they had access to over 50 million different data profiles from Facebook. Now, they took these data profiles and they categorized people depending on which way they might vote in the upcoming election. For the 2016 US presidential election, they essentially had three categories. They had those likely to vote for Trump, those on the fence, and those not likely to vote for Trump. And for each of these categories, they would show different advertisements. And in fact, they would personalize the advertisements to the individual users. Now, for the first group, the likely to vote for Trump, they would show them advertisements saying, hey, don't forget to go vote, grab your friends, grab your family, just get out there and go. They don't need to convince them that Trump is the right choice. They already believe that. So it's those middle ground people that the convincing needs to happen. So they would show them advertisements showing that Trump is the right choice for them, personalizing it depending on the user's data. For instance, if somebody had a lot of family values, they would try to connect family values to Trump and show the person an advertisement, trying to get them to believe and go and vote for this thing. And finally, those less likely to vote for Trump, they would show them advertisements basically de-incentivizing them to go vote, saying, your vote is 1 in a million, it doesn't matter, don't bother. So Facebook had this data, the data was then used, and from this, we were given three essential separate realities depending on whatever the person's data said. And Google too does this. For instance, with Google, if you are a person who has anti-vaccination beliefs, they would show you different Google results depending on that. This was a few years ago, it may still be the case, but at least back then, if you were anti-vax, you were shown anti-vax results if you just Googled vaccinations. If you were a person who believed or trusted in vaccines and you Googled vaccines, you would be shown results for the vaccines and them being good. So it reinforces the belief that was already there. But not only this, but because of the economic incentive of these businesses and the data, it was found that anti-vaccination websites were more likely to get more clicks than those that supported vaccines. So, because of Google and the algorithms they have in place, any person who were to Google something about vaccines, they would be more likely to see anti-vaccination results. because of the fact that these things got more clicks and therefore more money for Google. Now, what this is basically saying is that money is creating a sort of opportunity to further this sort of post-truth phenomena, that information is something that can be commodified and used for means of economic gain. Now, this isn't just these tech companies' faults for creating this post-truth phenomena through the use of data profiles. And when you think about it, how else would the data happen if not for our choices that we make? And so the next section, we're going to be taking a look at the ways that our own personal choice plays a role in the creation of this post-truth phenomena. So now let's take a look at the way our own personal individualized choices have a significant impact on this creation of post-truth. So, in order for us to create the data that then goes on to create the data profiles, we need to be making choices. What we like, what we watch, and what we follow all constitute the certain choices that we have towards a certain perception of the world. What I mean by this is if you're online and you're doing your online activity, you may find it that you only follow friends who share a certain political belief as you. Maybe you only watch videos that reaffirm your beliefs, and maybe you only have groups that do the same. And when you do this sort of thing, your perception of the world becomes very fixed in the sense that your choices went on to create your sense of the world. And since digital technology and information technology has become something of a cornerstone, it would be hard to say that our online activity doesn't somehow constitute our own individual way of looking at the world as a whole as well. That the information that we get and our way of understanding the world, we can choose how we want to understand the world. And this can go on to create, obviously, very subjective realities of our own understanding that is entirely different from perhaps the person next to us. Now, with this different sense of the world, it can create, this unshared environment. But of course, it's not always our choice, as I was mentioning with the data profiles, that some of these choices that we make, like the videos that we watch, the friends that we have, or the websites that we visit, sometimes these choices are presented to us because of those data profiles. That the recommendations that you have, the friends you may know, are all something pushed forward because they believe that's something that you would like. And so while we do choose online, and these choices go on to reflect our perception and sense of the world, the choices that we have in front of us are sometimes picked for us, predicted for us that these choices would be made. So it's this sort of enigmatic sense of choice and agency that we have. But both of these go on to create this uncertain environment of understanding, the one in which we can't agree with one another. And this is going to go on to then create the third point that I want to make in this video, and that is of epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. Now, these are some words that might have been used in a sort of buzzwordy fashion online. You may have heard of them before, you may not. I'm going to go ahead and just give my best interpretation of it and connect it with these other sorts of technological influences in post-truth. So, in essence, epistemic bubbles and echo chambers are two kinds of groups, although it can also just be an individual, but they're kinds of groups that filter information. Think about a bubble. There are things that exist within the bubble and outside, but there is nothing coming in between, that there is something blocking some sort of outside influence from the inside. Now, epistemic bubbles, they accidentally neglect and filter this sort of outside information. You can think about this as, say, a Facebook group working towards some sort of political activism. So in this group, things are discussed in support of this political activism. And anything that might challenge the sorts of things being discussed, it's sort of just neglected. It's not even brought up. The focus is on this one thing. And so any sort of information that may run counter is just accidentally pushed to the side. Now that's a bubble. A bubble is Obviously, it's something soft. But what about a chamber, an echo chamber? That's something much more strong and powerful. This is because echo chambers are also filter information, but do so in a very aggressive way. They attempt to undermine outside information. Their belief when you're inside an echo chamber is that anything outside that challenges is distrustful. You can't trust that information. Only within the echo chamber are things being talked about in the most genuine and objective way possible. Now, both of these, echo chambers and epistemic bubbles, can obviously create this sort of problematic information environment. That if we are in a certain situation where we are unable to see or even distrust outside challenging information, it sort of reaffirms our beliefs in what we're doing. It makes us overconfident, perhaps, in what we are discussing and thinking about. And the use of data profiles and choices essentially push us into one of these two things. In fact, all of us are probably, in some cases, part of some epistemic bubble or echo chamber, either through the groups we have, the friends that we talk with, or even us ourselves. So, all three of these, as I was mentioning here, go on to create this post-truth phenomena, that the use of our technology makes us susceptible to a certain type of environment where our data is being used with, for, and against us. Our choices go on to inadvertently create a very subjective sense of the world that may or may not be correct in every case, and how both of these in tandem work to create epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, a sort of collection of people or even individuals that are unable to see the other side of things, either through accidental neglect or aggressive resistance. Alright, so you've been introduced to the three ways information technology helps create the post-truth phenomena. And let me just start off by saying my argument for this video was not that we should stop using technology or information technology. There are so many obvious benefits that we get from using this technology. We have an interconnected world, and we have more access to information for the average person than ever before. No, my argument was that we ought to be aware of the sorts of harms and dangers that come from using this sort of technology. We ought to be aware of the fact that the choices that we make online in this digital environment go on to help create our perception and sense of the world in a very subjective way, and that these choices also help create data and data profiles that can help reaffirm this sense and perception of the world, and how both of those working together can place us inside epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, where any sort of challenging interpretation to my understanding of the world is either accidentally neglected or aggressively resisted. So there's some questions that we can ask ourselves now. What sorts of choices do I make when I'm online? How do these contribute to my overall understanding of the world? How does the use of my data help also create this? What sorts of data do I give out to places like Google and Facebook, and how might that be used against me or with me? And finally, what types of epistemic bubbles or echo chambers might I find myself in? I'm sure each of us find ourselves in it in some way, but we may be unaware of it. So how can we build a certain awareness for this? How can we use information technology to the best of its ability without falling victim to the sorts of things that help contribute to this uncertain way of understanding the world? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.